Men at Reddit who proposed and she said no. What happened afterwards with your life? My mother told my father no 3 times. On the 3rd time he got wasted at a local bar and basically started pouring his heart out to anyone who'd listen. Mind you, it's a very small village in the Italian Alps and my father barely spoke Italian and no one in the village spoke English, including my mother. Word got back to my mom about this sad American at the bar, so she went to find him and she told him she'd marry him. My parents celebrated their 44th anniversary last month. She was an art major and I had just joined the army. We had been lovers since high school. I asked. She said no. She wanted to get her master's. We were friends for a while but we don't talk anymore. She works as a bartender I think now. I ended up getting married to my best friend. I've been married for more than a decade and have a 5-year-old son. Oh, I have a story about this. My friend A had been with his girlfriend B for years. So he decided he wanted to propose. What he didn't know is that B was also thinking about proposing to him. A proposed first. And B freaked out because she had already set her proposal and bought a ring. So she said no. Over the next week, B freaked out more and more and refused to answer A's calls and messages. A then decided to use the money he had saved up to buy a plane ticket to Europe. What was supposed to be a 3-month trip through Western Europe turned out to be a year-long trip around the world. One day, A says that he's coming back and B decides to go and wait for him at the airport and propose to him there. It turns out that while being in Peru, I met a girl and they fell in love almost immediately and got married in Peru. 5 years later, and his Peruvian wife are still happily married and recently had a baby, while B hasn't still quite forgiven herself for ruining her relationship with A. As a woman who was engaged and the proposal was later revoked, it still stings a little 11 years later. When you're sure you're with the love of your life, losing them can really pop a hole in your life plans. We met in her home country of Germany while I was traveling. I knew I was in love. We dated long distance for a while. Me flying to Europe, her flying to the US. I suggested marriage so we could be together. She said no a few times. I didn't press. But I was patient and not being pushy. I knew she was worth the wait. Then it hit her, that's how we could be together. If we got married, we could live in a country together. The difficulties of being born on a different patch of dirt. A few years later, I'm still married to my best friend and living with her in Germany. Not all no's stay no. Life goes on. I never saw her again. Less than a year later I met my wife. We've been together 15 years. My husband asked 3 times in the span of a couple months. We had dated for 3 years. He was ready. I wanted to graduate college first. Also, don't propose by handing your sew a ring while you're both in the car on the way to Burger King. I'm low maintenance. But put some thought into it. We lived together for another 6 years until she changed her mind and told me that I should ask again. We were engaged for over a year and got married in 1991. We are still married, have 3 children, and are both still very much in love. My dad proposed to a woman who said no. My dad was a violent alcoholic and she said she couldn't be with him unless he got clean. Took him a little while, but he did it. He wound up meeting my mom through a matchmaker and they've been married 25 years. If that woman never said no to him, he never would have gotten clean. It was the lowest points in his life. But it all brought him to my mom who makes him happier than ever. My dad talks to her sometimes. She got married to someone else and they had a son who died from a medical condition. Well, that story went well until the last 6 words. She had cancer. I said we should get married because I had full medical coverage from my work. She said no. And over time we grew apart. Haven't talked to her in 15 years. Don't know if she died. I know a couple who did just that. He proposed in order to give her citizenship and health insurance so she could remain here and get cancer treatment she desperately needed. They stayed married for about 15 years and he even adopted her son. But they never lived together or were romantically involved. Years later, they divorced when he met the woman of his dreams and wanted to get married. They are all very close friends. With no drama. She lived and is a university professor now. He is in another state with the woman of his dreams. This is the story of my parents. My dad asked my mom to marry him several times. She said no. Several times. One day my dad asked my mom to marry him, yet again. She said yes. He freaked out and left her apartment and dumped her. 3 weeks later he hated his life without her and begged her to take him back and marry him. They were married 9 months later for 16 years until my mom passed from cancer. They loved each other so much and had such a deep appreciation for each other. That was 25 years ago. My dad has not remarried. No one will ever come close to my mama. Dated a woman for over 2 years and popped the question. First time she said I don't know. A couple months later I asked her again. She said maybe. I was pretty bent out of shape. But then I found out she was sleeping with several of my friends, so I dodged a bullet there really. I was a young Marine. I was only home during the weekends. Was dating this girl for about a year from my hometown. When I asked she said yes. Her dad, former Navy, kept saying we should wait. We put it off for a bit longer. Fast forward another year. She dumped me. Father informs me she has been sleeping with a lot of guys. Like more than 50 over the 2 years we dated. And was very happy I didn't marry her. And apologizes to me for her behavior. She then totally ghosting everyone including her family for about 6 months. Find out she moved 7 hours away and was living under a house. Not a basement. Under a house with her new BF. She calls her mom to come get her. Mother and father ask me to go get her and bring her home. Good times. Good times. My mom and dad were not married and wanted a kid and had me. My dad, being Catholic and Hispanic, decided he wanted to be married to my mom and proposed. She said no because she hadn't been divorced from her first husband for very long and now had 3 young kids and preferred to stay not married. He threatened to leave her and got on his motorcycle and started to drive away until my mom chased him down and gave in, leading to what my parents call the voodoo wedding the same day. I asked her right out of high school. But she wasn't ready. We stayed together. Went to college at the same school. Spent the first year in separate dorms. Then moved in together. Got married a few years later. Our 20th is coming up. My mom told my dad no when he proposed to her even though they were already living together. She thought he was impotent and it wasn't until she got pregnant that she said yes. In retrospect, I wish my parents had decided early in their relationship that they can barely stand each other. I spoke to her about it beforehand. And she seemed really keen on the idea. So I decided to propose about a week after in front of all our friends. She was so shocked she picked me up off my knee and shooed me away. Most of our friends were confused. Because everyone knew it was going to happen. And she said she was excited for it. I didn't know what to do. It was all really embarrassing and later she explained she didn't mean no, she just didn't know what to say and was scared. She said yes after apologizing profusely, and just this year we celebrated our 9th anniversary. Edit. I'm happy that this comment blew up. Not my story but someone I'm friends with. They both had TTY homes and became a couple at 14. Somewhere around 20 he proposed to her. She said she wasn't ready to commit yet. After that he'd propose to her every year partially in hopes she would be ready, but it was also kind of a ritual where he would show her that he's still serious. She would say no every time. In their late 20s he was done with his studies. She could see the finish line, so she told him she's ready, meaning marriage and eventually children. That's when he gets second thoughts about marrying the only woman he ever had a relationship with, and he wasn't sure if he was making a mistake. They went on a break. She went to the US from Europe to do her PhD at the MIT. They drifted apart more. She moved on and found a new long-term relationship with a partner that's a lot better for her, while he quickly regretted ending the relationship and started f***ing whoever he could find on Tinder without being able to form a meaningful relationship after. We'd been dating for a year and a half. And I was due to move out on orders, was in the army. She suggests we get married. I said no way. I was going off to school, army type, for 6 months. Then a year on a deployment to the Middle East. It just wouldn't work. She was calm. And then said, you think I'll be a burden to all of that? But I'll actually be a help. While just seconds earlier all I could think of was what a pain in the ass it would be to get married and leave. And now it, for whatever reason, seemed perfectly reasonable that she was right. We got married a week later at the courthouse. I was 22. Last month we had a nice socially distant dinner party for our 29th anniversary with our 2 amazing kids and a few friends. My mother turned my father down, but didn't outright break up with him. She just wasn't sure about the marriage idea. She valued her independence and was nervous about commitment. No hard feelings, though. He called up the next day when she'd had more time to think about it. And she said yes after all. They celebrated 32 years of marriage last month. She had said she wasn't really a fan of marriage. So I thought proposing non-marriage might be well received. And I wanted us to be together for the rest of our lives. So I asked her not to marry me. She said no. We have been married for 10 years. She said yes on the second proposal and now we're divorced. Edit. Reddit is such a weird place. All the carefully thought out posts and comments get zero recognition, and then this random off the cuff remark is my most liked comment. Glad you all got a kick out of it. For those wondering, I've been single for a year. I spent last night with a smart, beautiful woman and had a blast. Life is good. Second edit. Thanks mods. My life is now complete and I can die knowing I made a difference. We actually got married. Moved in together. 2 weeks later, she moves out. Blocks me everywhere and never gave me a reason. Shortly after I was served with papers. Now I'm divorced. That was last summer and not sure where I am now. Making work my main priority for now. I just want to know why for some closure. But that's too far gone now. She said yes as I had a special occasion planned. One of those observation wheels, and I proposed at the very top, and we were on our way to a family event and I had a ring made and everything. Then a few days later she said no. Everything fell apart. I was distraught. We continued dating for a while, but it was long distance, other side of the world. When I visited it would be super awkward. Eventually dad kicked me out. Was flying standby and was stuck in an airport for 4 days. Took me years to recover. Now I am happily married and I'm glad it never worked out. I was not in a good place when I met her and her family were super controlling. It would never have worked. The woman I married is super cool and is my best friend. Turned out better than expected. My dad kept trying. And was eventually successful when he stopped using onion rings. We were dating for a little over a year, but I was so sure she was the one. I drove 2 hours to see her at her college and went on a beautiful winter night walk and proposed. She looks me right in the eyes and said, "Oh, you thought this was serious?" Well, I don't know how to say this other than I have been saying other people. Well, actually I have been seeing other women. I was stunned. I got up, put the ring in my pocket and walked to my car, got in and drove away, never looking back, crying the whole time. Haven't seen or spoken with her in 7 years, even though she has tried countless times to reach out. Now it's a story I tell friends who are nervous about asking their significant others to marry them. About 2 years later I met my wife of 22 years. We are happily married. The one who said no got married. For the first time. Last year. And seems happy. My wife is way into me in ways that the former girlfriend never was. And I see my life as far happier with my wife than I ever was with the one who said no. She's not a bad person. I was just young and in love with someone who wasn't in love with me. It worked out for the best. I'm glad she said no. He didn't ask again. And I had to ask him instead. We married last year. I was proposed to several times by men when I was living in the Middle East. I think they just went and found the next American girl to propose to. Not me, but a guy I knew. Proposed to his then girlfriend in a restaurant. Made sure to have a friend record it. She walked out when he popped the question and pretty much ghosted him. He started drinking. Found a new passion in gambling and gambled all his savings away. He ended up living on money of the state. Works a garbage picker job now and almost set his house on fire at least 4 times that I know of by making food and falling asleep drunk. He was an interesting guy. Friendly to some, but the state he's in is just sad. Hope at some point he picks up his life again. Well, she said yes but no. Met her online and we really hit it off. She was just amazing. We only knew each other for a month before she moved in with me and it was just magical. Proposed just after a year together. She had a genetic disorder and it made her heart swollen. Familial dilated cardiomyopathy and it was pretty bad. You could see her heart pushing out in between her ribs. She didn't want to get married because then we wouldn't be able to afford her checkups and medication. She was constantly quite weak but still full of life. She took naps very often and one day she just didn't wake up. I cried for days and was heartbroken for a couple years. I still think of her quite often and visit her grave whenever I visit home since it is 1,000 miles away now. I know I filled the end of her life with happiness as she told me very often. Just feel guilty sometimes. I was the person who said no. We had only known each other for 3 months and he was smitten. I was more cautious. I said no. I like you but it's way too soon. He asked when would be enough time. I said maybe a year. He proposed again at midnight. 1 year after we first met. I said yes and we have been together 8 years now. Edit. I know a year was still not a long time. But we had a long engagement and didn't get married for another 2. My buddy proposed and she said. Okay. Well, I don't want to be the kind of girl that says no. They're divorced. I started reading this thread expecting to feel sad. But instead ended up feeling joyful after reading so many wholesome stories. My mum and dad had been dating for a few months when my mum proposed to my dad. He said no. Not until he gets a proper job and can provide. A month later, he'd secured a job. They celebrated 32 years of marriage last month. It was really bad for a while. Then it was really bad. Then it became really bad. Then it became bad. Then it was just blah. Then it was neutral. Then things started to get better. They continued to get better by me learning to be happy and me doing me things. I eventually found someone else. And things have been getting better for 20 years now. Dated my wife in high school. I was all wrong for her at the time. And it was going way too fast, so we broke up on good terms. One of the last times we talked, I asked her if she would marry me one day. She laughed it off and said no way. And said I was definitely not the marrying type. Fast forward to college. I was working full time and she was a law student. And she walked into the liquor store I was the manager of. We talked for an hour. And it continued in the parking lot. Just talking and catching up. At the end of the conversation as she was leaving, jokingly I asked her to marry me again. She laughed. I laughed. And she said we'll see. Married 16 years in October. Semicolon. Edit. We were living together. I asked. She said no. I love you but I need to think about it. I don't think I'm ready yet. Can you give me some time and ask later? Full stop. A few months go by. I ask again. Same response. A few more months. Same deal. A couple more weeks and then she says, hey, what do you think of us getting married? Full stop. I replied. That's an excellent idea. Why didn't I think of that? Our 39th anniversary is next month. I asked a woman after almost 6 years together. She said no. And added that maybe it was time for us to go our separate ways. Whoa. Shock. But life has to go on. About a year later I met a different girl and we were engaged within a year. We were both ready for marriage. That was 16 years ago. We've got 3 terrific kids. 2 boys that are exceptional athletes and a girl who's a brainy little nerd. The lady who refused me eventually got married. Had a couple kids. And got divorced. But she got married again. And had another kid. And got divorced again. We completely lost touch several years ago.